Hello and welcome to the latest in our food law updates. And this time we're looking at the ASA's position on adverts focused on foods that are high in fat, salt or sugar. That's HFSS foods. Now, back in 2017, the ASA introduced new rules, or CAP introduced new rules on HFSS foods, effectively porting over the TV rules so that they apply to non-broadcast ads. And that meant that you can't advertise in media that are directed at children or in media that have an audience of more than 25% that are children, and you can't also use celebrities or promotions or licensed characters that are popular with children. You can use those, can't you, for foods that are healthy and for non-HFSS foods. So it was a while, though, before we then got some cases from the ASA to illustrate how the ASA is actually applying these rules.
Yeah, but we have started to see those rulings, and we've seen some really interesting ones. They've come thick and fast this year. So I think the first batch we got, there was one for Ferrero.
Yes, this was one on social media issues. Ferrero used some social media influencers for this campaign, and they got these influencers to post on YouTube, on Instagram, and on Twitter, and there was a complaint that this was inappropriate because children were part of the audience. But they were able to produce data that showed, certainly for YouTube and for Instagram, that fewer than 25% of the audience were under 16. They didn't have robust data for Twitter. But the ASA was relatively flexible on this and took the data in relation to YouTube and Instagram and accepted that the audience here was fewer than 25% children.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? For me, I sort of suspect the ASA was influenced by the very adult sort of the fact that you didn't have any children in that blog, the fact that it was very sort of obviously talking to adults, because we know that they have been a lot harsher with some of the other rulings that we've been seeing.
Yes, tell us more.
Tell us more, all right. Well, I suppose, the really harsh one for me was actually the Cocoa Pops ruling, which has now been overturned, so maybe in the end they agreed, because what happened with that one was initially it was an advert for a newly reformulated form of Cocoa Pops granola, which was created specifically not to be HFSS, but obviously part of a range that does include HFSS, or is predominantly so. And initially the ASA looked at it and said, well, the use of some really iconic Cocoa Pops assets like the Cocoa Pops monkey and also the turning the milk chocolatey tagline means that actually this is an advert for the range, and therefore it's caught by the rules, which was really harsh and would have really influenced our thinking. But happily, I think, Kellogg's appealed the decision and it was overturned, which gives our clients a lot of certainty, a few areas. First of all, that you can do a product ad or for a non-HFSS product that is part of a range with HFSS, and provided it is genuinely a product ad, that actually should be okay. But also that these legacy equity brand characters that have so much history to them and so much intellectual property in them can actually be transitioned from HFSS to non-HFSS products and used to promote those non-HFSS products.
We've seen some guidance also, haven't we, on the use of age gating.
Yes, indeed.
The Swizzles Matlow case. So that was interesting, I think, because it shows the ASA taking a fairly no-nonsense approach to age gating. This was an Advergame app that anyone could download and play, supporting their Squashies World product, so sweets basically, promoted on pack, and there was an age gating functionality, so you had to type in your date of birth in order to access the app, but if you got that wrong you could just keep on entering until it let you in.
Yes, or perhaps didn't get it wrong.
Yes, well, exactly. And it was a case really where the bright colours and the overall look and feel really were consistent with this being aimed at kids.
Yeah.
The kind of comments that users had left also suggested that kids were accessing this, and the ASA said, yes, you do have an age gating functionality, but no, that doesn't prevent this from being in breach.
Yes, exactly. An age gate is not enough if your content is clearly for kids. And that picked up very clearly again in the Mondelez ruling that we've seen, because that was actually, well, the bit that I think was really interesting was the storybook there, because it was a storybook clearly intended to be read or possibly read to small children. It was about the Easter Bunny's big day out, so, you know, clearly not an adult read. But, I mean, Mondelez were very cautious there. They went for some very subtle branding. So they limited it to the use of the Cadbury's purple, and also to some images of the sort of chocolate eggs with the Cadbury's purple. And even so, the ASA said, look, this is clearly for children, and even that subtle branding was found to be a breach of the rules. So it does suggest when we got things that are very overtly for kids, they will be very strict about that.
Yeah, it's difficult when you're sort of trying to make out a case that you're targeting at adults if there's overlap in the audience.
Yes, it is. But interestingly, they actually didn't uphold the complaint about the website. In that same ruling. So they did say that actually, because the website clearly spoke to parents in its language and how it talked about family days out with the kids and such like, they said actually that was okay. So if you get the language right, it is possible.
So then the final of our 5 cases was the McFlurry case. This was a ruling against McDonald's, and somewhat harsh, some might say, in that there's always been an industry understanding, hasn't there, that you don't place outdoor ads for HFSS foods within 100 metres of the boundaries of a primary school. It's not part of the codes, it's not written down as a sort of cap code requirement, but it's just what the industry has done. And this was a case where McDonald's had an ad which by mistake was 47 metres from a primary school boundary, and actually in breach of McDonald's own internal requirements, which go beyond the 100 metres, don't they?
Yes.
They say 200 metres. So, you know, it was a case of error, but they then also, McDonald's, sought to defend their position by doing some research into exactly what was the proportion of kids who would have been in that vicinity and therefore exposed to the outdoor poster. And they found it was actually 22%, so lower than the 25% threshold. Nevertheless, somewhat harshly, the ASA said no, because it was closer than 100 metres, and therefore in breach of the kind of industry guidelines. This was in breach. So it's effectively the ASA saying they're adopting that industry position.
It is. I also think they were influenced by the fact that research was after the event, because a big part of the guidance in this is about taking a responsible attitude to that targeting. It's about doing your due diligence in advance and making sure that as best you can you've got the data to demonstrate, make yourself confident really that you have complied with the rules. And of course McDonald's only did that research after they got the complaint. So I think there was also a feeling that perhaps they had been irresponsible in the targeting because they hadn't considered that up front. So it's a little unclear whether, if they'd done that in advance, how that one would have played out.
Although, of course, they didn't know in advance that it was going to happen. So
well, no, quite, it's difficult to,
for them. Yes.
Yeah, of course.
So that's our 5 cases, and I guess if one had to sum it up, one would say that if you're very clearly targeting adults, then the ASA can be somewhat flexible in its approach. But if there's even a hint of children being targeted, then you have to be very, very cautious.
I think that would be fair.